And now we've heard a lot about the testimony before Congress last month. 3 military veterans testified, sharing their accounts and experiences in coming forward. Retired Major David Grusch, retired Commander David Fravor, and former Navy pilot Ryan Graves. Senior national correspondent at NewsNation, Brian Entin, joins us now to speak with Ryan Graves. Brian, over to you.
We're joined now by Ryan Graves. He is one of the witnesses from the UFO hearings at the end of last month. Ryan, thank you for being with us. I know this has been like a really, really busy time for you. I've seen you all over the place. There's been so much interest in you and your story, especially ever since the hearings. How are you doing? I mean, it must just sort of feel like a whirlwind for you.
It absolutely has been. It's been incredibly busy after the hearings. People have been very interested and eager to share their stories.
Yeah, I bet. And I want to hear more about the stories that you've been hearing, especially since the hearings. But first, just for people who maybe live under a rock and haven't been paying much attention, if you don't mind, and I know you've told the story many times, but just tell us again about your experience. You were a fighter pilot, and tell us about what you saw.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Brian. I joined the Navy in 2009, and shortly afterwards, I was flying F-18s off the Eastern Seaboard in VFA 11, the Red Rippers. We came back from a deployment aboard the USS Enterprise, and we were then operating off the Eastern Seaboard, and we started to see objects once we upgraded our radar systems. We were seeing objects on our radar that were not supposed to be there. They were performing ways that we weren't expecting a normal aircraft to behave like. And eventually we started to correlate these objects on our other sensors all the way up to our eyeballs.
Had you ever seen anything like that?
Well, I had not. What we ended up seeing was essentially a dark gray or a black cube inside of a clear sphere. And this was happening essentially on a daily basis, where we were having these objects working in our areas. They were operating within probably 1,000 square miles off the Eastern Seaboard. And we'd often have to cancel training flights and move to new areas, or perhaps just cancel altogether and return home if there was no more room. We eventually had to actually submit safety reports to warn other aviators that this was happening in the area so that they could watch out.
Wow. What did your bosses, what did the Navy say about this when you all reported what you saw?
Well, we didn't have really the best way to report these objects. We did have our normal safety channels that we could report aviation safety issues to through the Aviation Safety Center. However, that's not a proactive investigatory unit. That's really more for data collection. So although we submitted these safety reports and we integrated this into some briefs and eventually all the way into our notice to airmen in the local working area, we really didn't have any way for this to be brought to any sort of conclusion. We were simply just doing the best we could to warn people that this was happening and to be careful.
Did you know, Ryan, that it was something that was likely not from this world? I mean, when you first saw them, did you know that right away? Like, what was sort of going through your mind initially?
Initially, we thought they were radar errors, believe it or not. We didn't even think they were physical objects until we started picking these up on multiple sensors. And then eventually with our eyeballs, we realized, hey, this is a serious physical object that we need to be careful of. And then the question of where they actually came from was the next most important one. We initially concluded it was perhaps some type of classified program that was operating the area for some short amount of time and perhaps didn't know that it was causing such a big issue. That was essentially where we had left the issue until we had left on deployment in 2015. There really was no further analysis that we could really do other than say, we don't know what it is. We have to assume it's ours. We can't imagine it would be China or some other nation operating in such a sensitive area. And for us, what else could it be? We really weren't there to speculate. We were just there trying to be the best pilots we could. And when we left for deployment, I think a lot of us, I know at least I did, assume that the problem would eventually continue to escalate until it was resolved via normal channels. I didn't find out until 2017 when the New York Times article came out that showed the UAP videos that the issue did not resolve itself as I had hoped it would, but continued to be a problem. And so I actually reached out to some of my colleagues that were still flying on the Eastern Seaboard to ask them, hey, is this still an issue? Are you still seeing these objects? And they were still seeing them. They were still reporting them. They had them in those notices to airmen, the NOTAMs. And that was it. And that was really the moment when I decided that this was something I wanted to try to speak out about so I could try to help resolve this in any way I could.
Yeah, and talk to us, Ryan, about sort of the challenges that pilots face when they report sightings like this. I know that that's part of your work now with your organization. I mean, they sort of face a lot of pushback in many ways, it sounds like.
Absolutely. And, it's not anything mysterious. I think anyone that has approached the subject for any amount of time is probably familiar with the pushback that this topic can elicit. But when we're aviators, we have to understand that we have a professional responsibility to the aircraft and to the lives and souls in the back of that aircraft. And every pilot I've spoken to has always said that has been their number one concern when they care to share this information. They're not UFO hunters. They're not necessarily interested in this topic, but they have that responsibility, and they're frustrated that they don't have an outlet to be able to safely communicate this information in a way that not only gets it out and is safe, but also something is actually done about it so that we don't have this issue constantly popping up.
Is there still a stigma, though? Because we've even heard from some like commercial pilots who have spoken to us, like not wanting to use their name, but who are, scared to like report things because they think they might get in trouble or that their company might be mad or that they could, obviously that's how they earn a living and support their families by flying. And they're worried they could somehow even maybe lose their jobs if they report some of the things that they've seen.
Absolutely. There is some fear that they could be somehow ostracized from the community that they've been with their entire lives, in either hurt administratively or professionally in other ways. So there is absolutely that fear, especially when the reward for coming forward and communicating is essentially so low. So it's just a pretty pragmatic decision, I would think. But that's okay. I think that there are processes that can be put into place that allows pilots to be able to report these cases in a way that they're accountable for. Such as being able to validate their professional experiences, but also providing them by providing them the ability to be anonymous behind certain reporting systems. So
yeah, that seems like that would.
Yeah, those are some of the systems that we're working to be able to implement and recommend. They're systems that are both validated but also anonymous for the pilots that can report.
So since the hearings, have you noticed an uptick or a change in the reports that you're receiving?
I've noticed from commercial pilots that there is absolutely an uptick. Some relatively new information, I guess you could say, is that I am hearing from cases that are more broadly dispersed. So I have been reporting that north of the Atlantic and the north of the Pacific as well, pilots that are doing those transatlantic or trans-Pacific flights are seeing various objects, lights that are coming down, behaving in strange ways, holding in a pattern, look like almost like they're dogfighting in space in some way, kind of back and forth with each other. I've reported that coming out near the Big Dipper in the hearings. And since then, I've heard from many other pilots that have reported similar sightings that match the same description in other parts, such as in north-south flights off the eastern seaboard and elsewhere. So we are starting to get a broader data set now that more pilots both feel comfortable and understand that they're not the only ones with this problem. There's one thing that almost every pilot that talks to me says is that I didn't realize that other people were seeing this until I approached it with someone and they said, yeah, I've seen that too. And I've seen that too. So I would encourage any pilots listening to this to, if you have seen something, at least talk to your colleagues about it. See if they've seen it. If not, show it to them.
Yeah, and through your organization, Americans for Safe Aerospace, you get the reports from these pilots. Is there any like official way for them to report this information with the government, like with the FAA or the NTSB at this point?
Right now, the legislation for pilots simply suggests that the pilots should submit reports to the local law enforcement if there is some type of altercation with the UAP against their aircraft, or to report just a sighting of one to any number of UFO organizations scattered across the United States. So what we're looking to recommend at Americans for Safe Aerospace is the ability for pilots to be able to catalog and report this as a UAP safety issue within existing aviation safety frameworks.
And when you say like report to law enforcement, I mean, that almost sounds like comical in a way. Like, I mean, are they supposed to like call the local police department of whatever area they're flying over? Or?
Exactly. Practically speaking, they're just saying they don't want to have anything to do with these reports. Here are some options if you wish to do something with it. I mean, that practically speaking, that's what the legislation, or that's what the regulation says. And I don't think that's good enough. We don't think that's good enough at Americans for Safe Aerospace. And that's why we're pushing for integration of this as a true aviation safety issue into our existing frameworks.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious what you think. David Grusch was another one of the witnesses who sat there with you, along with David Fravor at the hearings, at the UFO hearings. And I'm sure you've heard by now. And Grusch, of course, for people who don't know, was a high-level intel official who is now saying that he had knowledge of secret government programs where they were covering up crash retrievals of UAPs. And he has now come forward and had to talk about the fact that he had PTSD at one point after serving in Afghanistan, because there was a report that came out sort of trying to discredit him in a sense. His medical records were leaked through a Public Information Act. What do you make of that? I mean, a lot of people are obviously feeling bad for Grusch now that he's having to sort of explain, a PTSD situation that so many other veterans have had.
Yeah, it really is really a shame to see that this play out in this very public forum. Mental health in the military is a massively unreported issue, and something that causes a lot of problems, both at home as well as at work for professionals in the military. And that's just due to the nature of the job. Unfortunately, I think that when you start airing the medical history and those type of mental illnesses that some of our soldiers have to deal with at times, is not just an attack on one of them, but it's an attack on all of us, frankly. I think there's no place in this for any type of attack on anyone that has to admit that they have PTSD or any type of mental illness.
Yeah, and David Grusch has spoken about it. He spoke about it to us in the interview we did with him initially. I mean, it didn't seem relevant to us at the time, like you said. I mean, so many service members deal with PTSD, and also the fact that it was very clear that after he was treated for his PTSD, he was able to keep his high-level security clearances, keep working, even I believe got promoted after that. So, I don't think it's fair to sort of use that as a way to say that he, is not telling the truth or something like that.
The Department of Defense has rightly encouraged soldiers to get help for those types of illnesses. And so to now come back and use that as a weapon against anyone within the armed service is I think, a failure of trust of the system.
Yeah, and I think it just goes back, it seems like, to why people are afraid to come forward with their own personal stories. Like they feel like they're somehow going to get called out or ostracized or silenced.
Well, that hasn't been my particular case. I know Mr. Grusch has had his instance where it seems like that has been the case, but I would encourage whistleblowers that if they do want to come forward, or witnesses, we do have the resources to be able to support that at safeaerospace.org. And we do have processes in place to be able to bring you before folks on Capitol Hill and within the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office as well, to be able to present your data and move the conversation forward. And that can be done in the strictest of confidences. So I would highly encourage people to make the patriotic decision in this case.
I want to ask you, Ryan, just a few quick questions from the Hill viewers who have sent in some questions and posted, and to see what you think about some of these. Dr. Greg Quinn, he is CEO at Indy Shack. He commented and wanted to ask you, assuming that the U.S. is working covertly on reverse engineering field propulsion, even if the basic premise of a special access program is revealed, wouldn't we want to keep working on that as a classified program? Would we want our adversaries to have that technology?
Yeah, I think this entire conversation needs to unfold under the blanket of national security considerations. And I don't think anyone is suggesting we jump the gun and reveal all of our state secrets. And Mr. Grusch has thoughtfully suggested to Congress that he could provide very specific details to some of the claims that he's made behind closed doors. And I would suspect that national security would continue to be considered as the conversation unfolds.
Yeah, and he's also been careful about what he will talk about in an open setting. I know anyone who watched the hearings saw probably that he said over and over again there was so much that he could only talk about in a closed setting. And then from Ryan Staywitz, if what David Grusch is saying is accurate, what do you view as the ideal method of relaying this information to the American public? I mean, it seems like, Ryan, like we're already doing that in a sense with the hearings. I mean, it seems like that was a big step forward, not only with what Grusch is alleging, but also with what you and Fravor are also saying, which, by the way, I think is different because your stories are real, like eyewitness accounts of what you saw with your own eyes.
Yeah, and I'll just add very quickly, I think even to bifurcate it slightly differently is that a conversation that myself and Mr. Fravor discussed, maybe more so myself, it is about what's happening right now. Pilots are seeing this yesterday, they're probably seeing it today, and they're going to see it tomorrow, most likely. In fact, some of the pilots are wondering why we're not flying aircraft up here to take a look at the objects to try to better understand them. So, it's very much happening right now, and it's something that we can, if we invest the right resources into, be able to go investigate and learn more about and eventually come to a conclusion on. Mr. Grusch was talking about programs and things that happened in the past, I believe all the way up to 1945 to the current time, which is a historical conversation that I don't have any context on. And I apologize, but the first half of the question is now eluding me.
No, it's fine. But I mean, what you talk about through your organization, Americans for Safe Aerospace, and the fact that pilots are actually seeing things, I mean, it does seem like a real national security risk in the now. I mean, I know you were mentioning a lot of this stuff is stuff from a while ago, but the stuff you're concerned about is stuff that pilots are dealing with every day.
Absolutely. And I think we're doing some of the right things in order to get that information to a state where it can be processed and then ingested into the national security infrastructure. And that's essentially the role that Aero is performing right now. So say they go look at an object off the eastern seaboard, it's behaving anonymously, it's determined to be a adversarial spy balloon. They're going to be able to process that out into the normal, natural, proper organization that can then prosecute that target. Aero is retaining, it seems, the anomalous cases, the cases that they don't have an explanation for, which is what we expected that office to do. Now, I think with the legislation that's currently going through in the Senate attached to the National Defense Authorization Act, it will provide a relief valve of sorts for the review of the information that Aero, and I think elsewhere as well, has already vetted and has said, hey, this is anomalous, we don't know what it is. Is this a matter of national security or not? If the answer is no, it is not, then I believe that the review board that's being established by that legislation in the Senate would then promulgate that information to the general public. And they would also make the determination that if something is a matter of national security, that would be retained. And my understanding that legislation's current state is the only person that could overrule that board would be the president.
Interesting. So I guess that would sort of answer the question that one of the viewers had about, where do you sort of draw the line with what should be public and what should stay secret as a matter of national security. It sounds like they're working on that, which I'm sure that is complicated behind the scenes. Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. We really, really appreciate it.
It's really my pleasure, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Thanks again to Brian Entin and Ryan Graves for being with us today.